Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a power struggle that has, pretty quietly, defined a huge chunk of Islamic history for over 1,000 years. It's this deep, constant tension between the rulers, the ones holding the sword, and the scholars, the ones holding the sacred texts.
And this question, right here, it gets to the very heart of a dynamic that has shaped societies all the way from the medieval caliphates right up to the modern nations we read about in the headlines today. It's this constant push and pull, a negotiation over who has authority, who's legitimate, and who's really in control. You see, the answer lies in a kind of historic deal. But this wasn't some formal treaty signed in a fancy hall. Nope. It was a slow, profound shift that started with a revolution, and it completely rewired the very meaning of leadership and power in the Islamic world. So, to really understand this great power divide, we first have to look at what things were like before the split. We need to go back to a time when political and religious power were totally fused together in one single absolute figure. This title, it was everything. Deputy of God. Think about that for a second. It meant the caliph wasn't just a successor to a prophet. He was seen as God's direct representative on earth. He claimed ultimate authority, not just over the state, but over religion itself. So in this setup, the early scholars, the Ulama, they could give their opinions, sure, they could offer some advice, but at the end of the day, the caliph had the final say on law, on tradition, on pretty much everything. His power was absolute. But as you can probably guess, this kind of all-encompassing power, well, it wasn't built to last. A revolution was brewing that would completely shatter this model and create a whole new political order, one that would stick around for centuries. So when the Abbasid dynasty overthrew the Umayyads, they ran into that classic problem every new regime faces. They needed legitimacy. How do you prove you're the rightful rulers? Well, they got it by striking an unwritten but incredibly powerful bargain with the religious scholars, who were becoming more and more influential. And here's where things get really fascinating. It all comes down to a subtle but absolutely seismic shift in language. The caliph's title changed from Deputy of God to Deputy of God's Messenger. Now, that might sound like a small change, but it was a massive concession. It meant the ruler was no longer God's direct voice. He was now bound to follow the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. So who were the experts on the Prophet's traditions? You guessed it, the Ulama. This deal effectively handed them the keys to the entire kingdom of religious knowledge, or ilm. This knowledge was all about the Prophet's traditions, his practices, the Sunnah, and his sayings, the Hadith. The Ulama became the sole legitimate interpreters of God's will. And this is the moment they really emerge as a powerful, unified force to be reckoned with. So what you end up with is this new division of labor, this great split. The caliphs and the sultans, they would handle all the messy business of politics, armies, and taxes, and the ulama, in exchange for giving the rulers legitimacy, they got to control the entire religious sphere. We're talking law, education, social norms, the whole shebang. This split became the basic political DNA of the Sunni Islamic world. All right, so let's take a look at how this new order wasn't just a fluke, not just a one-off thing with one dynasty. It turned into a remarkably stable system that became the standard model across different empires. And what's amazing is just how durable this power-sharing deal was. I mean, from the Abbasids, it just kept going. It continued through the Seljuk Turks, and even into the massive Ottoman Empire, which actually created a formal bureaucracy just for the ulama. For more than 1,000 years, this separation of powers was just the way things were. The ulama's authority was completely rooted in controlling a very specific kind of knowledge, this ilm. And just to be clear, this wasn't some vague mystical or philosophical knowledge. Oh no, this was the technical mastery of the prophetic traditions, the hadith, and the science of law, or fiqh. They built an entire ecosystem around this knowledge, founding the great schools of Islamic law that are still around today. Of course, not everyone was on board with this arrangement. A lot of oppositional movements, especially in Shiite Islam, saw this division of power as a major corruption of the original ideal. For them, the real goal, the true path, was always to reunite the political and the religious spheres under a single infallible leader, or imam. Okay, so let's fast forward to the 20th century. The rise of modern, post-colonial nation-states, well, it set the stage for a massive gamble, a huge attempt to finally break this 1,000-year-old deal and bring the ulama under the thumb of the state.
And you can see this play out in a few different ways, each with its own, let's just say, explosive consequences. In Turkey, Ataturk's radical secularism didn't just sideline the ulama, it created a kind of spiritual vacuum that radical groups later just rushed in to fill. In Egypt, Nasser tried a different strategy. He basically turned the ulama into government employees. But that created this deep divide between official, state-sponsored Islam and popular opposition movements like the Muslim Brotherhood. And then in Iran, the Shah's aggressive secular reforms were seen as a direct attack, and they alienated the powerful clerical class so much that they ended up leading a revolution against him.
And that revolution in Iran, wow, that was the most dramatic reversal of the old Abbasid bargain in a millennium. Khomeini didn't just challenge the state, he took it over completely. His model of the guardianship of the jurist explicitly reunited political and religious power in one clerical figure. He made the historical exception the new rule.
And this really captures the modern dilemma perfectly. As our source material puts it, these post-colonial states find themselves in a really impossible situation. They're trying to build modern institutions, but they're also grappling with these deeply embedded, centuries-old structures of religious authority that just refuse to be easily controlled or ignored. The legacy of this great power divide is still fueling conflicts and shaping politics all across the world today. And that leaves us with a massive question for the future. Is this 1,000-year-old deal between the state and the scholar finally broken for good? Or is it just being renegotiated for a new, modern era? The answer? Well, it's still being written.